Hi, I'm Brad Bright. Welcome to the God is Issue podcast, where we show how God is the issue in every issue. Do you remember how we used to hear believe the science all the time, every time the issue of climate change came up? Now, we rarely hear that anymore. Do you ever wonder why? Did science die? What happened? Now, I have a theory. Let's call it the believe the science postmortem theory. Now, before I start on my postmortem conclusions, I want to give you some context. So let's rewind back to the Obama presidency. Now, if you were paying attention during the Obama presidency, one thing became curiously obvious. Obama only used the phrase believe the science or settled science in conjunction with the term climate change. He never used it in conjunction with the term man-made global warming. Did you ever notice that, or was it just me? Now then, call me jaded, but I regard that as a stark omission. See, Obama knew that climate change was an undeniable science fact. So it was a scientific fact. So did every American. We all learned in grade school about the global ice age, right? We all know massive volcanic eruptions can change the global climate. We all know the Earth's orbital path around the sun drives long-term climate change. That is all undeniable scientific fact. So from a scientific perspective, climate change is real. Now stay with me. Oh, parenthetically, the Bible also teaches that climate change is real. Remember Noah and the flood? You see, science and the Bible agree that climate change is real. Go figure. But I digress. I believe that why Obama always said believe the science or science, settled science regarding climate change, but he never used it with man-made global warming. You see, what politicians don't say is often just as important as what they do say. Always pay attention to the silence. Now, a recent example of this was on display during the most recent White House Christmas tree lighting ceremony. The point of Christmas is to celebrate the birth of Jesus, right? But Biden completely ghosted Jesus in his remarks. Now, does that give you any clues about how Biden really feels about Jesus? If he really believed that Jesus was God, was the Son of God, do you think he would have completely ghosted him at Christmas? Folks, always pay attention to what politicians don't say. Pay attention to the silence. Now then, let me get back to the topic at hand. The scientific data to prove man-made global warming was insufficient during the Obama years, and frankly, it still is. It requires a blind leap of faith to embrace man-made global warming due to insufficient scientific data. Now then, of course, there's also insufficient data, scientific data, to disprove it either. So when it comes to man-made global warming, the only intellectually tenable position is to be agnostic. I consider myself agnostic on man-made global warming. I don't know if it's true or not. I am open to being convinced one way or the other if someone can give me conclusive scientific data. Now, you may lean one way or the other. I get that. But if you actually believe that man-made global warming is true or is not true, then that's your truth. That is not scientific truth. However, when it comes to climate change, the only scientifically tenable position is to embrace it. So Obama, being an extremely savvy politician, he spun the conversation as climate change so he could credibly say, believe the science. He's a smart guy. Now, let me reemphasize that when listening to skilled politicians, it's just as important to listen for what they don't say as to what they do say. Word choices matter in politics. Now, if you don't listen closely to the specific words that politicians use, you will be fooled just about every time. I mean, as P.T. Barnum said, or at least is purported to have said, there are two types of people in the world, con men and suckers. Thank God for the suckers. I remember back in the 1980s during the Reagan administration, I was working on Capitol Hill at the time, and there was a huge debate over SDI, that is the Strategic Defense Initiative. There was a congressman from Georgia who went back to his home district, and when addressing conservative groups, he would say he voted for SDI, that is a Strategic Defense Initiative, and that was a true statement. However, when addressing liberal groups in his home district, he would say that he voted against funding SDI. And that was also a true statement. Both statements were true. He voted for SDI and he voted against funding SDI. You see, when the initial bill for SDI came up, He voted for it. But when the package to authorize funding for SDI came up, he voted against it. Now, politicians, folks, will be politicians, right? You can decide for yourself whether or not he was intentionally trying to mislead the voters of his district or not. But that brings me back to the question, why don't we hear politicians say believe the science anymore? Any guesses? Folks, here is my postmortem theory. With the advent of the choose your own pronoun phenomenon, the phrase believe the science, it's a problem, isn't it? Science can still only identify how many genders? 2 genders. However, wacko politicians, lit professors, gender studies professors, they preach that gender is a social construct, that it's made up, that it's not real. Therefore, you could be any one of 2 billion genders on a given day, or something ridiculous like that. By the way, have you ever noticed yet that the science professors are not driving the choose your own gender frenzy? That's very, very telling. Now, if you start with believe the science, then the anti-science gender ideologues face an insurmountable obstacle. It's no wonder they flee from a conversation about science and gender. Instead, they want to teach your kids about all the evil cisgendered folks that are out there. Look, I'm not surprised by all the wackos in academia. I doubt you are either. They've always been there. They've always will be there. It's like the president of Harvard who recently doesn't seem to understand that lopping off the heads of Jewish babies is intrinsically evil. I mean, folks, that's exactly what the Nazis believed. Same song, second verse. She's a complete wackadoodle, right? Apparently Harvard's board is as well. But what I find morbidly fascinating is that the same politicians who used to promote believe the science regarding climate change have now completely jettisoned that from their toolbox in the age of choose your own pronoun. Why? I'd be very interested to hear from you if you think that the current omission of science is intentional or not. If you believe it is intentional, I'd like to hear from you why. Conversely, if you believe it's not intentional, I'd also like to hear from you. Now, it just so happens that if you believe the science, there are only 2 genders, right? Likewise, if you believe the Bible, there are still only 2 genders. Interesting how science and the Bible agree on climate change and gender. Who knew? Now, politicians know that directly attacking science would be political suicide. People would regard them as complete wackadoodles, just like the president of Harvard. Their dilemma is science undermines their ideological rhetoric, but they can't attack science directly. So instead of attacking science, they quietly bury it. On the other hand, many of those folks love condemning people of faith who love God and love their country. The folks Obama said cling to their guns and religion. The folks Hillary called a basket full of deplorables, and the folks that Bill Maher recently said are mentally ill. Now, don't get mad at me. I'm simply repeating what Obama, Hillary, and Bill Maher said. No one forced them to say it. Now, but let me get back to the point. Either you believe the science or you don't. Either you believe the Bible or you don't. If you believe the science and the Bible, then there are only 2 genders. Now, conversely, if you believe there are more than 2 genders, then you don't believe science and the Bible. It's really quite that simple. So you can either believe science and the Bible, or you can believe all the wacko lit professors, gender study professors, sociology professors, and politicians who lust after power, who are obsessed with power. It's your choice. So here's my final believe the science postmortem. Believe the science died, not because science isn't true anymore, but because when it comes to gender, it's an inconvenient truth. And so is God, by the way. If there really are more than 2 genders, then God must be saying oops right now. And if God says oops, here's the problem. We're all in trouble, aren't we? Maybe God said oops after he said peace on earth, goodwill toward men. Maybe God said oops after he created you. And maybe he really did say oops after he created your gender. Is that what you believe? You see, God really is the issue in every issue, including gender. And by the way, God never says oops. This is Brad Bright. Thanks for joining me today. And remember to like, share, or subscribe to this podcast if you found it helpful or encouraging.